I didn't know what it meant at the time. I just knew it hurt. That word. Special. It echoed through the classroom like a sentence being read aloud. I was 13, sitting at a desk with a cracked leg, surrounded by students I didn't recognize and teachers who spoke to me like I was 5 years old. "This is your new class, sweetheart," they said with a voice coated in syrup, like they were handling a wounded animal instead of a human being. I didn't understand why I had been moved. I wasn't failing. I wasn't dangerous. I was just quiet. Too quiet, apparently. And quiet, in their eyes, meant broken. They never said it outright. Not at first. They didn't have to. Labels in high school don't need to be spoken to be permanent. They're tattooed in whispers, in glances, in the way people stop looking at you when you walk into a room. That first week I heard the word retard whispered behind my back 3 times. Once in the hallway, once during lunch, and once as I tried to tie my shoes without shaking. It wasn't the word that broke me. It was the laughter that followed. Laughter from people who didn't know me. Laughter from classmates who once used to ask for my help with math homework. I wasn't diagnosed with anything serious. I had anxiety. That was it. But that one meeting with the school counselor where I told her sometimes I couldn't breathe when the room got too loud changed my entire identity. From maybe shy to needs intervention. And just like that, I wasn't part of the regular crowd anymore. I was placed in a room near the back of the school, next to the supply closet, with a peeling poster on the wall that read, "Believe in yourself," as if those 3 words could undo everything they were about to do to me. My name was removed from the student council list without warning. My science fair project, which I'd already started building, was reassigned to another student. The chess club, the one place where I felt normal, told me my new schedule wouldn't allow for participation. They took everything from me under the banner of what's best for you. But what they really meant was, you don't belong with the others anymore. My old classmates didn't visit. My teachers didn't ask questions. Even my parents, who meant well, said things like, "Maybe this will be good for you," and "Maybe you'll feel less pressure now." They didn't see that the pressure wasn't academic. It was loneliness. It was the way people stopped saying my name and started referring to me as the kid in room 103. It was how the lunch tables filled up faster whenever I got near. How my name stopped showing up on invitation lists. How even the janitor started calling me Little Professor, like it was a joke I wasn't in on. One day I stayed late after school and overheard 2 teachers talking outside the staff room. "He's smart," one said, "but he'll never fit in here. Some kids just aren't meant to thrive in the normal track." I don't know what hurt more. The fact that they thought I couldn't hear them, or the fact that I understood exactly what they meant. I wasn't broken. I was boxed, categorized, filed under unfixable, and shelved. What they didn't know was that I kept a notebook in my backpack. In it, I wrote everything. Not just how I felt, but how I saw my school could change. I wrote about classroom structures, group work systems, how students with anxiety could be supported without being isolated. I wasn't trying to escape. I was trying to design something better. But back then, it was just ink on paper, a small rebellion no one noticed. Yet, still, the label stuck. Even years later, when I saw old classmates in grocery stores or at the mall, they'd smile too wide, too politely, like they were talking to someone fragile. "It's great to see you," they'd say, then glance sideways to their kids or friends, as if checking how much longer they had to fake it. No one ever asked what happened after I left. No one really wanted to know. The label was easier. But I remembered every word, every smirk, every time a teacher passed me over for a question because they assumed I couldn't keep up. Every time a student whispered special ed under their breath like it was contagious. I carried those moments with me, not like wounds, but like proof that one label can cage you. But it can also be the reason you fight to build your own door out. And that's what I was planning even then, quietly, patiently. While they laughed behind closed doors and put limits on my name, I was already sketching the blueprints for something bigger. Not out of revenge, not at first, but out of something more powerful than spite, purpose. If the label was the wound, the whispers were the infection. They spread fast and quiet, slithering through the corridors, from locker to locker, class to class. I never saw who started them, just felt the aftermath every time I walked into a room. Heads turning slightly, just enough to glance, then snap back into forced focus. The way someone's shoulder would shift a little closer to their friend as I passed, like I was something contagious. I used to wonder if I was paranoid, if maybe I was imagining the smirks and the giggles, until one day I heard it clearly. Room 103. said with a grin, followed by a cough of laughter. Like my existence had become a meme in the school I once dreamed of graduating from with honor cords and applause. The worst part was not knowing who I was to anyone anymore. I had friends. I had them. Not many, but enough. But after that label, after the transfer, silence. It wasn't that they openly turned on me. They just faded. No more texts. No more group projects. Even online, I became a ghost. A like here, a polite reply there, but nothing real. They didn't want to be associated with the kid who now sat in the forgotten wing of the school, with students no one talked about unless they were the punchline of a cruel joke. Sometimes I would hear my name mid-conversation, cut off when I entered, followed by chuckles. Other times, I'd find notes in my locker. Not threats, not violent, just mean. Hope they let you wear a helmet now. Or, special boy deserves special treatment. Once someone printed out a photo of me at the last school assembly I was allowed to attend and scrawled, "Future Janitor of the Month" across the bottom in red ink. I didn't even get angry anymore. I just folded the paper slowly, slid it into my bag, and moved on. The teachers were no better. Some avoided me entirely, refusing to meet my eye when I passed them in the hallway. Others tried to be overly kind, their voices dripping with a fake warmth that was almost worse than the silence. I could tell they felt sorry for me, and that kind of pity is heavy. It crushes you more than hatred ever could. Hatred is at least direct. Pity is a quiet funeral before the body even hits the ground. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't write angry posts or make speeches in the cafeteria. I listened. I watched. I paid attention. Because if I was going to survive this place, I needed to understand exactly how it worked, what made people laugh, what made them fear, what made them listen. The cruelty wasn't random. It was a system, a hierarchy, a game, and I wasn't playing anymore. I was studying. There were days I sat in that tiny, half-lit classroom at the end of the west hallway and pretended to take notes while I memorized patterns. Which kids ruled the lunchroom? Which teachers quietly enabled the bullying by doing nothing? Which administrators only showed up when the media did? I wasn't just learning equations and history dates. I was learning human behavior and deeps. Down, I knew I would use all of it someday. Not for revenge, for something smarter, something louder. I still remember the worst moment, though. It was a Friday afternoon, end of day. The hallway buzzed with pre-weekend energy, and I was at my locker when a group of students passed. One of them, a guy I used to call a friend, looked at me and said loud enough for the others to hear, "Hey, don't stare too long. He might have a meltdown." They laughed like it was the most original joke in the world. I didn't say a word, just closed my locker. But that laugh, it stuck with me. It echoed for years. That day, I stopped seeing the school as a place to belong. It wasn't home anymore. It was a battleground. And I wasn't going to fight with fists or tears. I had something better. I had that notebook. I had observations. I had ideas. And I had time. So I stayed quiet. I let them laugh. I let them whisper. I let them believe they'd won. Because every empire falls when it gets too comfortable. And they didn't know it yet. But I had already started laying the foundation for something they could never take from me. Not popularity. Not sympathy. Something real. I used to believe that schools were built to protect students. That there were rules, structures, people whose jobs were to see what others didn't, to catch the cracks before someone fell through. But somewhere between the moment I got pulled from my old classroom and the day I was asked not to come back for a week, I realized the truth. The system doesn't fail you all at once. It gives up on you quietly, in pieces, and calls it procedure. My first suspension came after I refused to participate in a group activity that made me the center of a joke. The teacher claimed I was being non-cooperative, even though my hands had been shaking, my voice barely above a whisper when I asked to sit out. I got a full day at home for disrupting the learning environment. When I returned, I found my desk moved to the far corner of the room, as if I was a distraction just by existing. Then came the reports. Weekly ones. Behavioral notes, they called them. Most weren't even accurate. One said I refused to speak in class. Another claimed I was aggressive during a science lab. The same day I wasn't even at school because of a dental appointment. But it didn't matter. They were building a paper wall between me and everyone else, one page at a time. A wall tall enough that no one would question when they decided to keep me out of the school trip, or the science fair, or the awards ceremony. I'd worked so hard to qualify for, It wasn't just about punishments, it was the erasure. My name was slowly scrubbed from lists, rosters, announcements. One day, I opened the school newspaper and saw a photo of the top 10 students most likely to change the world. I had submitted a project that semester that had been praised by one of the few teachers who still treated me like a person. But I wasn't in that article. In fact, I wasn't mentioned at all, not even a footnote. I started spending more time in the library, not reading books for class, but reading about school policies, educational law, how public institutions handle problem students. And that's when I understood. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way. Built to reward the loud, the likable, the easy to manage. Built to push out anyone who made things complicated, anyone who didn't fit. And I was labeled complicated. The counselor they assigned to me would smile during our meetings, say things like, "How are we feeling today?" in a voice so hollow it echoed. I tried once, just once, to explain how it felt to walk past a group of peers and know they had created a group chat with my name in it. I told her about the memes, the jokes, the emails. She nodded, scribbled something in her folder and said, "Well, it's important to focus on your own behavior," as if it was all my fault, as if I had chosen to be the target. Eventually, the principal called my mother. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the summary later. "Your son is no longer thriving in this environment." That was their official phrase. Not that I was being bullied, not that the system had failed me, just that I wasn't thriving. Like I was a dying houseplant they didn't want to water anymore. They asked me to consider alternative schooling. They said it would be better for everyone. And that's when I realized they weren't going to expel me. That would make them look bad. Instead, they would exhaust me, isolate me, push me out gently enough that they could pretend it was my idea. And for a moment, it almost worked. I almost packed it in, almost accepted that this was my ceiling, that I would never be anything more than the quiet kid in room 103 with the behavioral file and the pity stares. But then I looked at my notebook. I looked at the sketches, the blueprints, the pages filled with ideas for how to fix this place, not just for me, but for everyone who came after. I read my own words, written in frustration, sometimes in tears, and I felt something rise up in me that I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. So when I left, I didn't leave defeated. I left aware that I couldn't fix the system from inside. But maybe, just maybe, I could change it from the outside. Not everyone turned away. In a building full of closed doors and eyes that looked right through me, there was one person who didn't just see me, she noticed. Not in the way you notice someone who's out of place, but the way you notice something important others are missing. Her name was Ms. Dalton. She taught history in room 207. I wasn't even in her class anymore. But the first time she saw me, crying silently in the hallway after yet another detention I didn't deserve, she sat beside me on the bench, didn't ask what was wrong, didn't try to fix anything. She just said, "You don't belong in the box they've tried to put you in." I didn't believe her at first. No one had ever said something like that to me without a trace of condescension. She didn't look at me like I was broken or burdened. She looked at me like I mattered, like my presence had weight. The next week she found me again, this time in the library surrounded by notebooks, my hoodie pulled low to avoid the glances of other students. She walked up quietly, holding a folder. "I've read the essays you left behind in your old classes," she said. "The teachers may have overlooked them, but I didn't. You have ideas that are worth something." I wanted to argue, to say she was wrong, that those ideas were just frustrated ramblings I'd scribbled while trying to stay awake in classes that treated me like furniture. But before I could, she handed me the folder. Inside was a proposal, not hers, mine, the one I had written in the margins of a homework assignment. Ideas about how to reform our school system, about mentorship programs, inclusive curriculum, mental health awareness. I remembered that day. I'd been angry. I'd filled every inch of the page, knowing no one would ever read it, but she had. "I want to help you develop this," she said. "Not for a grade, not for the school, for you." That was the first time in years that someone offered to help me, not because they had to, but because they chose to. She started meeting with me twice a week after school. We didn't call it tutoring. It was more like building something. Together, we mapped out the broken parts of our school. She let me rant. She let me dream. She asked questions that made me realize I wasn't just angry. I was observant, strategic, capable. We worked on research, formatting, even public speaking. "You don't need to speak loud," she told me once. "You just need to speak clear. Make your words impossible to ignore." She bought me my first real notebook, not the tattered ones I kept hidden in my backpack. This one was leather-bound, heavy, dignified. Inside she wrote, "You are not your label, you are your impact." Those words burned into me. Ms. Dalton wasn't popular among staff. I later learned she had clashed with administrators before. She pushed back when the system failed students. Not just me. Maybe that's why she recognized what was happening. Because it had happened before, and she had seen what it did to kids who didn't have someone in their corner. One day I told her I was thinking of dropping out for good. She didn't try to stop me. She just said, "If you do, make sure it's a step forward, not a retreat." She gave me something more valuable than a classroom. She gave me permission to believe in myself. And more than that, she gave me a mission. She called it the project, the blueprint of change we had been developing. "If they won't let you, stay," she said. "You take everything you've learned and build something they can't ignore." I didn't know it then, but the project would be the seed of everything that came after, the notebook that changed my life, the ideas that led to my return, and eventually the moment I stood in front of the same people who once dismissed me and said, "Now let's try again, this time the right way." But none of that could have happened without Ms. Dalton. One teacher, one voice in the dark, one person who believed before anyone else did. It started as just a notebook. Black leather, no lines, thick paper that made every scribble feel like it meant something. A gift from Ms. Dalton, but also a responsibility. She told me to use it only for the things that mattered. Not tests, not assignments, not things I had to do, but things I wanted to build. At first, I didn't know what to put in it. Ideas felt too big, dreams felt too far. But one night, I opened it anyway, and began with a single sentence. If school is where we're supposed to learn, why does it feel like a place where people forget who they are? That sentence led to another, then a diagram, then a page filled with arrows, notes, quotes from books I read in the library, statistics I found online, stories I'd overheard from other students who also felt lost, misjudged, or invisible. The notebook became a mirror, a blueprint, and eventually, a manifesto. It was where I wrote about a mentoring program where seniors would support freshmen emotionally, not academically. Where I drafted a mental health support system with safe spaces, peer counselors, and daily reflection journals. I even dreamed up a schedule where students could choose to start school later in the day if their mental or family health required it, and submitted mock-ups of how this flexibility would reduce dropouts and improve overall performance. It was wild, naive, idealistic, but it was mine. Ms. Dalton encouraged every page. Sometimes she'd leave sticky notes with questions. What would this look like in practice? Who do you think would resist this idea, and why? What does success mean to you? These questions didn't break me down. They built me up. They made me go deeper, made me test my beliefs. It was the first time I realized I didn't just want to fix what was broken for me. I wanted to change it for others, too. As my time in school grew more unbearable, the notebook became my reason to stay sane. The taunts continued. "There goes the special ed freak," they'd whisper. Someone even stole my lunch one day and wrote "future janitor" on the brown bag, but I didn't lash out. I went home, opened the notebook, and wrote, "The people who laugh at you now might one day work for you, but that's not the point. The point is, you'll make sure they're never laughed at like you were." I filled it slowly but steadily, and as I neared the final pages, I realized it wasn't just a collection of scattered ideas anymore. It was a full, actionable plan. A real proposal, something I could submit, maybe even to schools beyond mine. It had structure, purpose, and most importantly, it had heart. That's when Ms. Dalton gave me her final gift, a list of names and emails. "These are people who run youth innovation contests, scholarship boards, social entrepreneurship programs," she said. "They won't care about your transcript. They'll care about your vision." I didn't know how to write a professional email. I didn't even think they'd respond, but I tried anyway. I scanned the notebook, turned it into a PDF with a cheap app from my old phone, and sent it to the first 5 names. 2 replied within a week. One of them invited me to speak on a panel about student mental health. I didn't tell anyone at school, not even my parents. I just went. I wore a borrowed shirt, trembled through my speech, and watched a room full of adults actually nod along, listen, clap. And at the end of that night, a woman approached me and asked if I had ever considered developing my project into a pilot program for real schools. That woman worked for an educational nonprofit. She offered mentorship, funding, visibility. It was the first time I looked at the notebook not as a shield, but as a key, a way out, a way forward. Soon after, I was suspended. Again. Another accusation I couldn't fight, another warning letter sent home. But this time I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I just packed the notebook, thanked Ms. Dalton for everything, and walked out of that school knowing I wouldn't be coming back the same way. The notebook that changed my life wasn't magical. It didn't open doors by itself, but it held every step I needed to take. And every time someone tried to erase me, I wrote another page. And in the end, that notebook became more than a record. It became a promise. They called it expulsion. I called it freedom. But it didn't feel like that at first. When the final meeting happened, no appeal, no suspension this time, just an official letter with bold words and cold faces. I remember sitting in the hallway, holding that paper like it weighed more than I did. My parents didn't even come. They were tired, distant, used to this routine. If they think you don't belong there, my father had said the night before, maybe they're right. He didn't mean it cruelly. He meant it as surrender, but I wasn't ready to surrender. The school may have shut its doors, but they never locked my mind. I went home that day and sat at the kitchen table. It was 4:17 p.m. I remember the time because it was the exact moment I decided I wasn't going to wait for someone to teach me. I'd do it myself. At first, it was chaos. I didn't have a curriculum. I didn't even know where to begin. But I had the internet, a slow second-hand laptop, and a growing obsession with understanding the system that failed me. I started by watching YouTube lectures, math, science, psychology. I printed out free textbooks from open-source websites. I followed lesson plans posted by teachers I'd never meet. I used apps to quiz myself. I made flashcards. I built a schedule, blocking out study hours like it was a job, because it was a job. I was building a life no one believed I could have. Sometimes it felt like I was running uphill with weights on my ankles. The world kept moving without me. Class pictures posted on Instagram, seniors celebrating prom, college acceptance letters being shared with joy. Meanwhile, I studied in silence, with no locker, no friends, no cafeteria chatter. Just me, my notes, and the voice inside my head that whispered, "You're not done yet." The notebook stayed open next to me every day. It wasn't just a tool now. It was a timeline. I'd write new ideas, revise old ones, sketch diagrams, rewrite goals. I made a pact. Every hour I spent alone would be an hour I invested in never being invisible again. And it paid off. After a year of self-study, I took the GED and passed with one of the highest scores in the district. I didn't walk across a stage, there was no tassel to turn. But when the certificate arrived in the mail, I held it like it was gold. Not because of what it meant to the world, but because of what it proved to me. They gave up on me, but I never gave up on myself. That score opened doors. A local community center offered me a mentorship spot in their youth entrepreneurship program. I met with professionals. I got feedback on my education reform plan. One of the mentors, a former principal turned nonprofit director, looked me in the eye and said, "You've got something real here. Don't stop." I didn't. I applied to a community college with an essay titled, "What I Learned After You." Expelled me. I was accepted on full scholarship. At orientation, someone asked me what high school I came from. I said, "Nowhere that mattered." And it was true, because what mattered was what I built outside of it, and who I was becoming because of it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same system that labeled me unteachable had accidentally taught me the most important lesson of all, how to teach myself. I knew then that my story wasn't just mine. There were others like me, students pushed to the edge, written off as lost causes, too complicated or too slow or too different to fit inside the walls of a traditional school. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted reach. I wanted to build something that would keep others from falling through the same cracks I did. And so, with a degree in motion, the notebook in my backpack, and a fire that hadn't gone out since the day they kicked me out, I kept going, because they expelled me, but they never erased me. I didn't become successful overnight. There were no shortcuts, no viral stories, no handouts. But there was something stronger than luck: consistency. While others my age were preparing for college with school counselors and teacher recommendations, I was cold emailing professors, filling out applications alone at 2 a.m., using borrowed Wi-Fi from a closed coffee shop's parking lot. I had no school name to impress the judges. I had no club memberships, no sports trophies. But I had a story, and I knew how to tell it. I wrote about the time I created my own curriculum after being expelled. I wrote about the notebook that evolved from a quiet escape into a blueprint for change. I wrote about being mocked, labeled, pushed aside, and how I turned that pain into planning. Some people wrote essays about leadership. I wrote about being invisible and how it made me see everything. Some wrote about teamwork. I wrote about being left out of every team and still finding a way to win. To my surprise, the responses came faster than I imagined. One scholarship committee didn't just give me the grant. They called to ask if they could publish my essay as an example for future applicants. Another foundation gave me a mentorship opportunity with an actual policy advisor who'd once restructured inner-city schools. One of my favorite emails came from a tech nonprofit. "We see future leadership in you. Let's build together." Each opportunity felt like a new brick in the house I was rebuilding from scratch. It wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that I wasn't the failure they told me I was. Proof that my ideas, my voice, my drive, they mattered. I began to see that being expelled wasn't the end. It was the prologue. With every internship, I learned more. I interned at a city education board where I shadowed people who actually had the power to make change. I saw meetings, budgets, blind spots. I saw how often students like me were excluded not by cruelty, but by carelessness. I spent one summer developing an app prototype that helped students anonymously report unfair grading practices or discrimination. That same app would one day receive early funding from a social impact startup accelerator. They asked me what I wanted to name it. That's when it happened. The name, not of the app, of me. Because I wasn't just a kid who had been expelled. I wasn't the student in the special class. I wasn't the joke in the hallway or the silent boy in the back row. I had become something else. It started small. On the app documents, I wrote my full name, middle name included, initials sharpened. On resumes, I dropped the name that had always been the subject of jokes and used the one I gave myself, a name tied not to my past, but to who I chose to become, a name no one could mock, a name I built. People who used to laugh at me wouldn't recognize it now, but they saw it. They saw it in articles, on LinkedIn posts, in local newsletters about the rising voices of youth-led reform. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't behind anyone's shadow. I was casting my own, and with that name, I submitted my application to return to the place that had once pushed me out, not as a student, but as a proposal, because I wasn't done, not even close. I still remember the sound the front doors made as they opened, heavier than I remembered, slower, as if time itself resisted letting me back in. My shoes tapped the same floors I had once been pushed across. The trophy cases lined the hallway, still filled with awards I was never allowed to compete for. But now, they didn't intimidate me. They didn't define anything about me. Because I wasn't returning as a student, or even as an outsider seeking closure. I was returning as something no one ever expected me to be, the person they invited to lead the very place that once refused to see me. It started with a letter, an email actually, from the district board. They had heard about my initiatives, the platform I'd created for underrepresented students, the success of the anonymous reporting tool I'd launched, the TEDx talk that unexpectedly went viral. They wanted to pilot some of my strategies in struggling schools. One of them was mine. When I saw the name of the school in the proposal list, something in me froze. That old ache returned, quiet, familiar, but no longer paralyzing. I could have ignored it. I could have chosen another district, but I didn't. I chose to face it. I chose to go back, not for revenge, not to prove anything, but to rebuild from the inside with the knowledge of what it felt like to be on the outside. They welcomed me with smiles, polite applause, some awkward handshakes from staff who clearly recognized me but weren't sure whether to bring it up. Most avoided it. Some were no longer there. Teachers who had retired, administrators who had transferred, but others remained. Familiar eyes, familiar silence. I was introduced at a faculty meeting. They called me an innovative mind with a passion for equity in education. I spoke briefly, professionally, calmly, but beneath my voice was a quiet fire. Every word I said was rooted in memories they had no idea they'd given me. The times I sat in class hearing my name mispronounced on purpose. The moment a teacher laughed at my handwriting. The day I was told I didn't belong on the school trip because I hadn't earned it. Now I stood before them, not with complaints, but with solutions. I outlined my plan. A curriculum that integrated real-world problem-solving, mental health resources embedded directly into homeroom structure, Anonymous feedback systems from students to teachers, equity councils made up of students who had once been overlooked, and a promise: no one would be labeled and forgotten the way I had been. Some clapped, a few looked down. One teacher, one of the ones who used to ignore me entirely, approached me afterward and said, "You always had something in you. I'm glad you found the right path." But it wasn't a path I found. It was a path I carved, and I was still carving it. The most surreal moment came during a tour of the building. A student guide was assigned to show me the new facilities. A junior, quiet, shy, the kind of kid I used to be. He didn't recognize me, of course. Why would he? But halfway through the tour, he asked, "Can I tell you something?" I nodded. "I heard you used to go here. Is it true?" I smiled. "It is. Everyone says you changed everything." "That's kind of crazy." "Crazy how?" "I don't know. Just cool. Gives people like me hope, I guess." That was when I knew. My return wasn't just symbolic. It wasn't just about me. It was a signal, quiet but strong, that the system didn't get to write the final chapter. Not for me, not for anyone else who had been silenced, mocked, or pushed to the margins. Walking back into that school didn't erase what happened, but it rewrote what could happen next. And for the first time in a long time, the walls felt like they were listening. The first apology didn't come with tears. It didn't come with flowers or a sudden revelation of guilt. It came in the form of an email. Short, hesitant, almost clinical. It was from Mrs. Jennings, the language arts teacher who once told me I'd never survive college with that attention span. She wrote that she had read about me in an article highlighting alumni who had transformed education in underserved areas. She didn't mention the past directly, only said, "I always knew you'd do something meaningful. I'm sorry I didn't say it then." I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't know what to feel. Gratitude, anger, vindication. In truth, I felt nothing. Not out of cruelty, but because I had already grieved what she had taken from me, the chance to believe in myself when I needed it most. Her email, no matter how sincere, could not return those days. But it was a beginning, and I had learned to accept beginnings even if they came long after the ending. More came. A few in passing, awkward nods in the hallway. Former classmates who used to whisper as I walked by now lingered near the faculty lounge or waited for me after meetings. Some acted as if nothing had happened at all, as if we had simply drifted apart like childhood friends. Others tried to reconnect, using phrases like, "You always had that spark," or "We were just kids back then." There was Ryan, the loudest voice in every joke at my expense. The one who once shoved my books into a puddle and called me the broken kid. He was now a substitute teacher, apparently trying to get his certification. He cornered me after a board meeting, eyes downcast, hands fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve. "Hey," he said, "I guess you don't remember me, but I did." I remembered the day he told the entire cafeteria that my dad had left because even he didn't want to deal with someone like me. I remembered the way the room laughed, the way I didn't eat for the rest of the day. "I was a jerk," he said. "No excuse, I thought it was funny, it wasn't. You probably hate me and that's fair." I looked at him, truly looked at him, not as the boy who mocked me, but as the man who had clearly carried his own weight of regret. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't offer rage. I offered something more real. Silence that didn't hide pain, just recognized it. Then I said, "We're not those kids anymore." He nodded. He didn't smile. He just left. There were others whose apologies would never come. The counselor who told my mother I was mentally unequipped for traditional learning. The principal, who once said he should probably focus on vocational training, not college. And the classmates who used to write slurs in my locker or rip my projects off the walls. Their silence spoke louder than any words, but I didn't need their apologies. Not anymore, because every time I walked into my new office, every time I sat at my desk with the sunlight spilling through the windows, I remembered where I had come from and where I no longer lived. I didn't need them to rewrite the past. I had written a new future, and perhaps the most powerful moment came when I spoke at an assembly, the same stage where I once stood invisible, passed over, mocked. This time I stood not as a forgotten name, but as a recognized voice. I looked out at students, many of whom reminded me of who I once was. Quiet, misunderstood, fidgeting in seats too stiff for bodies too full of dreams. "I'm not here because the system believed in me," I told them. "I'm here because I believed in myself when no one else did, but you shouldn't have to fight that hard to be seen." When I finished, there was silence. Not awkward, not empty. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they're witnessing something they'll remember later. And in the back of the room, I saw Mrs. Jennings again. This time, she stood and clapped. Too late to change what happened. But maybe, just maybe, in time to change someone else's tomorrow. There's a window in my office that faces the east courtyard. It's large, wide enough to let the sun in during early meetings, tall enough to frame the field below like a picture I never meant to hang. That field used to be asphalt, cracked, bleached gray from the sun. Back then, it was the unofficial court of hierarchy. It's where the cool kids lounged on benches that weren't theirs, where dodgeball games became just another excuse to hit the easy targets, and where I once sat alone at lunch, pretending I liked eating near the dumpsters because I enjoyed the quiet. Now it's a vibrant space. There's new grass, a walking path, a reading corner with shade sails and beanbags where students curl up with graphic novels or journals. The old fence is gone. The murals on the wall were painted by students last spring. One of them, a 7th grader named Leah, told me she wanted her painting to show what it feels like to breathe and not be scared someone will make fun of you. I didn't cry when she said it, but I wanted to, because I remembered what it was like to hold your breath through the whole day, hoping your name wouldn't be called in roll so no one would laugh. I remembered how I used to eat half my lunch in the bathroom because I couldn't take another day of whispers. I remembered the sting of a dodgeball to the face and the sound of laughter that followed. Not because it was funny, but because I was always the acceptable target. I remember all of it, and now I sit in the office that once belonged to the principal who told my mother, "We've done all we can. Maybe a special center is more appropriate." The desk is different, the walls are brighter, but the memory lives in the cracks they didn't bother to fix behind the new paint. I don't stare out that window every day, but when I do, I see more than just students. I see possibilities that didn't exist when I walked these halls. I see boys and girls with noise-canceling headphones and teachers who meet them halfway instead of labeling them a distraction. I see clubs for neurodiverse learners, safe rooms for mental health breaks, and student-run initiatives that would have been dismissed as too idealistic just a decade ago. There was a day last fall when I stood at that window and saw a boy sitting alone by the tree line. He was fiddling with something, maybe a Rubik's Cube or a tiny notebook. A group of students walked by, and for a second I froze. The way they slowed, glanced, whispered. I braced for the echo of my past to repeat itself. But then one of them walked over, sat down, and pulled out her own sketch pad. No words, no smirks, just presence. And I exhaled. Because maybe we had built something better. Some days, the pain still visits. Not like before, not like an open wound, but more like an old scar you feel when the weather changes. I walk these halls now in a suit instead of hand-me-down jeans, but I carry the past with me, not out of resentment, but as a reminder of what not to ignore, of who not to forget. I was once the student no one wanted to claim. Now I'm the adult, responsible for making sure no one ever feels that way again. And from my office window, I watch the playground transform every day, not into a place where people forget their pasts, but into a place where they finally get to outgrow them. And in that quiet moment, I don't need applause. I don't need recognition. I don't even need forgiveness from those who never offered. Because the laughter that once haunted me no longer has the final word. Now it's the sound of children who feel safe, and that is enough.